Alrighty, I think this works. I will take a photo so you can all see how stupid this setup is. But I think it's gonna work. Okay. So, the part that I'm going to show you today is how to highlight the models really quickly and simply. That will mean that you don't have to do intricate detail. It's very quick, looks good on the board, and really won't take you very long. So at this stage, what we've done is we've based the model white. We've then painted the hair, or any feature piece on the model really, that you want to have a true color, like quite a dark or deep sort of color. We've painted that particular part of the model to be of whatever color you want. So in this case, I've given her red hair and this one brown hair, because I want the hair to be quite a focal point of the model, because it's the top of the model. They're pretty small, they're going to be across the board, so that part's going to stand out. And then after that, we've done everything else in washes. So there's two reasons why we do everything in washes. One, it's really fast, and two, it's very easy. So if you're either new to painting models or time poor, it's a very quick and effective way to get your models up to a decent standard, paired with the following effects, without having too much time sunk into it. It really only works for living models because they tend to be they can get away with being a bit dirtier. So in War Machine terms, it works for Circle, most of the Hordes factions. It wouldn't really work for factions like Trollbloods potentially, or Scorn, who run quite a clean sort of look. They're trolls, even though they're not clean, they've got quite vibrant blues or whatever color you're kind of going with. So for them, I wouldn't recommend this sort of look. But for people like Circle, particularly like these girls or the Blood Trackers, where they're running quite a dirty sort of look, like these girls are wearing skin to start with, and then they can get away with a little bit of blending of colors on the edges. Don't worry, this video isn't aimed for you to be able to see every step that I do. It's so I can describe it quickly and easily, and you can go back over it if you need to. I'll put up still pictures of each stage so you can get an idea and you can see clearly what the model will look like at that stage. Okay, so what I've done with these models so far is I've painted the hair, I've done the wash, I've done two different stages of washing. This is where I think people underutilize washes, or that they oversimplify washes. A lot of people paint their base color, whatever it might be, then they wash, then they highlight, and then they do edge highlighting and they call it done, which is perfectly fine. But if you want to paint with washes, for lack of a better word, if your color is coming purely from the wash, which in this case it is, you want to get a little bit more depth to it. So for instance, these girls, I've done a brown wash on their clothing, I've done 2 layers of brown wash on their clothing, and then a black wash over the top of that. So what that does is it gives it a desaturated brown, and then the black adds a little bit more to the edge, sort of gives it depth, gives it sort of, it makes it less two-dimensional effectively. This girl here, where is she? This girl here has only had a single layer of the brown wash put over her so far, and that's still not quite deep enough, though you could get away with it if you were in a particular hurry, or again not too fussed about the end result, you're just after a quick how-to. And then for the skin, for these ones, because originally the idea behind these for me anyway was I wanted to be closer to the wolds of English wolds, where they have the light skin and the blue tattoos, that sort of thing. And so instead of getting stuck in and doing tattoos all over them on tiny little models, I didn't really want to spend a week on each model, though it would look awesome. What I've done is I've kind of integrated that hue into their general skin tone. And so for that, what I've done is I've done a mix of Thraka green and the blue, which has gone somewhere. Here we go, Draken's Nightshade. And it's created a sort of a muddy blue kind of wash. So I've gone over the model once with a mix of those two colors, and then I've followed up with just a blue. So what that does is it really creates that hue that you want to get of the blue, and then again, but I've done a black wash over the top of that, but again, it's not again, for this particular wash, it's watered down, so it's not a pure black wash, it's 50-50 dilution. So what that ends up looking like is a washed pale blue. But all told, each of those steps take you minutes. So I tend to paint in mass when I do this sort of technique because you've got to wait for washes to dry and things like that. So I wash this particular unit, there's 6 of them, or for the blood trackers I've done them in groups of 5. Just again, that also, it prevents it from you getting bogged down on a single step for too long, which can often get boring. And yeah, you can progress through your units quite quickly with the step, but prevent that sort of repetition that can be killer. So what we do then when we get to the highlighting stage is there's 2 stages of highlights for this type of model. There's dry brushing, which again will work for any color that you've picked, you know, for your particular models. So this is a brown palette model with a bit of blue thrown in there for differential. But if you were doing, say, blue models or green models, red models, anything that's sort of got that kind of look, you'd pick your lightest possible shade that you're going to go up to, and you would dry brush carefully, but you would dry brush the model to get it up to a higher point. And then if you ever over dry brush a model, which can be a problem, put another watered down mix of whatever color that you've washed it, and that will settle the dry brush down a little bit. So if you dry brush it and you get like big stroke marks through your model, or like it's just gone too light in a particular area, you water it down and you just paint with the wash, and it'll settle it down, it'll nest it back further into the model so it doesn't stand out as horribly. There is limitations to that technique, like if you go way too light or way too thick a paint, you might want to quickly wet your brush, or another brush, sorry, not your dry brush, and go in and clean the paint off initially, and then let that dry, or dry it with a bit of tea towel or napkin or something, and then wash it, or then just continue with the dry brushing if you've managed to clean it all off. And that will fix up any errors. But you can also use that technique, or a version of that technique. So if you see down here, you may not be able to see it in the video, but at the base of her skirts here, I've let the ink pool by mistake. Don't do this, avoid this if you're using, and what it's done is it's left black all through the base of the skirt, but it hasn't left it in a nice clean sort of edge highlight or the crevices. It's sitting over it as if it's been painted or mist. So what I do, and I've done this on this one already, where are we? This one here already, is it was even worse on this model. I had black halfway up the skirts. So what I've done is I've watered down my bone color that I'm doing for the base, and then I've painted it over at a 30% paint, 70% water. So it's almost a wash. It's getting there, but it's not quite. And then that will lighten the skirt up, so it's still darker at the bottom. It looks dirty, it looks messy, that sort of thing. But then when I pair that with a thinned down brown wash over the top of that, that will then give it the detail that I want, and then I'll dry brush it again and it'll be done. So barring drying time, you'll spend maybe a minute and a half doing the corrective process. So again, it's very quick, very simple effect, but it ends up cleaning up those issue areas. Which this goes into my next point, which is when you're using washes. There's 2 ways to do washes. The most common way that I see people do washes is they just cover the whole model in a color. Some people might differentiate between, say they're doing red armor and like for Khador, they're doing red armor and they're doing silver engines, and so they will wash the armor in brown, and they'll wash the engines in black or a combination of to make it look rusty or dirty or whatever. When you're doing washes, there's two kinds. You can do a full body wash, nice and thick, it'll look okay. The other type is painting with washes, and it sounds silly because you're painting the whole time, but that's where you're truly picking out the details that you want to have that depth to it. So instead of just washing the entire model like this guy here, I've washed the entire model with a blue wash and a brown wash on the guts because I just wanted to dull it all down, pick out the details, see what's going on. I'm going to hit this with an airbrush later on and lighten things up, and I'm going to give it a bit of tonal shifting, and then I'll go in with a paintbrush and I'll pick out individual details, do some edge highlighting and make it look really nice. But at this step, I've really just painted in bright blue, turquoise blue, wash, and that gives me a good kind of base understanding of where this model sits, how I'd like things to then sort of blend together or stand out. So I want his tummy to come up to like a bone color so that it looks like an alligator's stomach, and I want the back scales to really go nice and bright and nice clean edge highlights so that it looks really kind of impressive on the board. And I want the blue and the green on his hands and his skin to really kind of, I don't want there to be a clear edge to it. I want it to sort of build together, and then eventually you'll get to, at some point it'll change along the way and you'll be like, oh, okay, that's blue and green and blah. Whereas for this fella here, what I've done is I've put down my base coats, I've done all of that sort of work, and then I've highlighted and dry brushed and washed and done all kinds of work on the paneling here to get it up to a nice bone color. And then he's got these little cracks in his armor here, which are going through to kind of a fleshy looking sort of part to it. And so instead of painting that in and taking my time and doing all that, in order to get this kind of progressed and moving along, what I've done is I've made up a mix of red with a bit of lathe medium. And then because I'd already gone over it with a bit of white and a bit of that, I've just painted the wash in there. And then it's a very quick process, but I can highlight that further if I want to, or I could wash it again, or I could just paint over it because it's very thin paint if I didn't like how it looked. But by just doing that single, following the lines, you can even have a little bit of spillage on the edges and it'll look fine because it's a very thin color, and it'll look quite effective. And that's what I mean when I say painting with washes. So it's not where you're like on the edge here where it's just a big metal bit and I'm just trying to darken it down and make it look a bit dirty and muddy and, pick things out. This is when I'm trying to get to very specific areas and I'm trying to add a color, but I want it to be a thin color. So I've already added in the tonal shift with the base coating, and then the paint over the top is just adding a bit of color to that tonal shift. It's a very effective and fast way of painting, and it looks great on the board. So everything I'm telling you about today is how to get stuff up to a nice tabletop quality. It's not for competition painting, though you definitely could use these style of techniques in competition painting, but it's more a case of how to punch things out when you're either learning and or time poor. And so that's pretty much me at all times, either learning and or time poor. So once you've done your dry brushing, you've got your model up to a nice kind of general state. You've got let's say 2 to 3 to 4 different tonal shifts within the model. You've got the darkest points, you've got the gradient getting it to the midway point, and then you've got your highlight at the edge. Most models, if you can get that sort of 4-point gradient shift on the board, will look great, and they'll even stand up to a little bit of general inspection up close. Now this is an optional point, which I always do for my models, but for some people it'll be unnecessary, for other people it won't be enough. It depends on where you sit on the painting spectrum. But what I like to do after I've done these real general tones is I go in and I clean it up. So that's where it's important to have a very clear palette at the start of what you're painting. So for these particular models, the palette is Dryad Bark, Baylor Brown, Ushabti Bone, and a bit of Death Guard Green. They're the 4 different browns, effectively, and variations of, that I'm using on these models to get them up to a nice, clean consistent sort of color palette. And then I'll throw in a little bit of Lothran blue, which I mix with the Ushabti bone. This is to highlight the skin areas. You mix it with the bone so it doesn't look like you're painting you guys blue. The bone, to probably like a 75% bone, 25% blue, will then come up and it'll provide nice edge highlighting over the top of where you've dry brushed with a bit of bone earlier. Okay, so the tricks to quick highlighting, for anybody interested, is what I tend to do is I get my lightest color, and I mix that down to about 30% paint, 70% water, just like this. So I'm going to get a little bit of that, so just a brush worth, and then a few good big mixes of water. So, well, let's change that ratio because I just tried that. So let's go with about a 50-50. You want it to be about somewhere about midway between a wash and a standard when you pull paint out of your pot. So when you pull your paint out of your pot, it's a bit too thick. You always want to water it down a little bit. And a wash is too thin at this point. We want it to be a little bit more, whatever that word is, thicker. Let's go with thicker, the base. Bit more substantial, there we go. And so for this particular model, what I'm going to pick out with the wash is all the highest points. So the models they're girls, so they've got breasts. They're all in fairly dynamic jumping or standing poses, so they've got legs and things showing up through the skirts, and they've got little bits of cloth that are flopping around. So what I want to do after the dry brush is there's two sides to it. First side is I want to clean up anywhere that blue has come from the skin onto the cloth. Because you're dealing in washes at the start of this, that does occasionally leak out over, the areas. So this, for me, has happened here at the top of the crop top that the girls are wearing. So I'm just going to highlight that up all the way down over the breast, and then highlight the breast a little bit, and then again on the other side. So what this does is this has two effects. One, it cleans up little bits of messes, but two, it adds a really sharp edge to your model where up until now there's been not many sharp edges. So it creates that look of completion without actually having to paint anything more. So I can now leave that crop top, or I can add a little bit of lightness down here at the bottom, clean that up a little bit. There's a few little bones at the bottom here, which I'm going to paint over, because I want them to look a little bit more finished over the top of the blue. And then I go around to the back of the model, and she's got a couple of little straps that come around here, which I'm just going to highlight up the sort of the highest points, highlight the top of the little strap that's been done up, and the two little straps that come down the middle of her back. Now by doing that, I haven't even touched the skin at this point, but the skin already looks more complete and more deliberate because of how clean the bra is. So yeah, that is really like a win-win as far as painting and speed painting, because I've now finished that top. You saw how long that took. It was seconds. And so I now move on to the skirt, and then she's got this big fold down the middle. I'm going to paint the very highest points and work that back up to the top of her waist, but in a very general sense. And then I might just do a little bit of edge highlighting down here at the bottom, like the tiniest amount, and then that's done. And then we're going to go to the edge of her dress here where her legs are, and there's a little bit of blue there. Just going to tidy that up a tiny bit. Tidy that up. And then down at the bottom of her dress here, this is where earlier I've painted on that quite light version of the brown over where the black wash is pooled. That's now dried, and I'm just going to go over it again. In a very general term, I'm going to leave a little bit of darkness around the edges there, going to tidy it up again. And then when I put the brown wash over again at the end of this, you probably won't have to paint it. But again, with the brown wash, you want to be careful. You want to be painting with the wash. You don't want to just smash a wash down. You want to paint it in where you want it and add any kind of levels of depth that you need. And then, alrighty, paint in there, onto her bum. Now, This is where you also can look at the model. This is a very large sheet of not much going on the back of her model here. So on the front you've got like nice little details for everything to pull in and create kind of shading effect. The bum is very flat, it's very bland, and so I've had a little bit of paint pool in the middle of it, so I'm just going to tidy it up. Now because it's only a 30% sort of strength, it leaves a little bit of what was originally there under it. So it creates the look on the model of a little bit of weathering, a little bit of like the skin, because they're wearing skin dresses, the skin's a little bit torn or gross or whatever you want. Because it's a living model, they're wearing people, they're not going to be, you know, up to the nines, as you do. And then, yeah, just a little bit of highlighting up on the highest points, up on the leg down here, and then done. That's enough. That's all it needs to be for this. Now, she's got string that cross her legs, so I want to highlight that up and make that look deliberate. Same kind of concept as with the bra. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to use the edge of my brush. You can see the brush I'm using isn't particularly small, but just by using the edge, I can just run that along those straps, and then it'll bring it up. Then we're going to go up here to the hands. The hands have got little wraps on them. Now, I don't spend too much time on these sorts of things, so the wash has gone over it first, and it's created quite a nice sort of two-tone effect there. I'm just going to pick up the highest points, and again, I'm going to use the edge of the brush just to pick up the very top bits. If you use the point of the brush, you risk the brush either caving and then sort of putting paint into the shaded areas, which is a pain to fix. You've got to re-wash it and do all that sort of stuff, or wash the paint off quickly if you're fast enough. But if you use the edge, you just pull up those little bits and it'll just add a third level of highlight to that particular area. It's not a focal point, it's not a particularly important part of the model, but to have it nice and clean adds something to the model. Then I'm going to go in, I'm going to pick out the bone head dress things that the girls wear. I'm going to tidy those up a little bit and make them look nice and clean. Then I'm just going to go in and I'm going to pick out any particularly like noteworthy parts of the model. So for this one, they've got little skulls, little animal skulls tied to their waist because they've gone for the theme of I wear dead things. And then around her waist, she's got like a little belt going on. And then her face, again, she's wearing a mask. I'm going to go in, I'm going to tidy that up a little bit. Now again, you've got a 30% mix of water and thing going on here, so you're always going to show through the base color a little bit, which is really ideal. That's what we're going for. We're looking for those subtle builds. We're not doing edge highlighting, we're not painting Space Marines. This is all about having a few gradients of color on any given piece. But by keeping it consistent and picking out those keystone parts of the model and making sure we spend a little bit of time on those, the rest of it looks deliberate, even if it's not. And again, this is pretty low skill level stuff, if you know what I mean. Like, none of it's too particularly fancy. We're not doing non-metallic metal highlights and all that sorts of business that looks amazing but takes 4 hours to get a sword done. It's very quick. We're just adding in a little bit more deliberate tonal shifts here and there. Alrighty, so I'm going to put her down for now because she's, well, I'm going to call her done, but she's not. I'm still going to do a little bit of work on the blade and a little bit of work on the skin because they're the two things I haven't touched. And then I'm going to pick out these like armbands that she's got on with a metal color, and then I'm going to base her. Now, basing is very important when you're doing this style of effect, of painting, sorry, because so many times I see people do bases that are real basic. They're like, there's a bit of dirt, they've chucked a color over the top, and then they've dry brushed a bone or whatever color they're going for, and they maybe put a bit of grass on it and they've called it quits. Basing is incredibly easy because it's all washes and dry brushes again. But if you spend the time and even go on the internet and look up, you know, complementary colors. So I know that I'm doing a bone color sort of palette, really is like the primary color is bone for these girls. And so I want to do something on the base that's going to be nice and it's going to be bright, it's going to stand out. And then by the time you paint the black around the ring of the base, and you darken up their base and you dry brush it in and you add a few different bits of static grass. I have a fairly large collection of static grasses, so I've got like medium tones, I've got bright greens, I've got dead grass, and I've got some snow and some black grass. I've got some different flower effects, all that sort of thing. Spending a bit more time on your bases will really complement the models and make sure that they really, you know, it'll make an average model look great, and it'll make a great model look fantastic, and it'll make a shit model look decent. So yeah, so just take a bit of time to do that. Now I won't do the blue with you here just because we're 25 minutes in and I don't want you sitting here watching for an hour. But the blue is an extension of what we've already done. So you're going to take the color of choice, your highlight color, you're going to mix it to a low, sort of a 70-40, 70-30, 60-40 type mix. Play it by ear, test it out on maybe a practice model doing this whole thing first. And then highlight up just the edges. So I do, like for these girls, I do the shoulders a little bit, up onto the shoulder blades, pick out their stomach, just a tiny bit, a little bit on the chin, because the chin's a nice prominent part. You may want to do just the edges of the boobs in here, just so they pop out, up here through the shoulders again, down the sides there. Do a tiny bit on the feet, but again, use the sides of your brushes for the feet. Down here on the heel of the foot. All these kind of, like, the most prominent parts of each part, you want to pick it out with a little bit more clean brush strokes, and it'll make the dry brushing that will sit then under the clean brush strokes look a lot cleaner and far more deliberate. And then again for the blade, these blades, I do them as a sort of a stone effect, because I figure if they're running around in skin, they're probably using stone. But you know, if you're doing metal, you would just do your base metal color, a wash, and then a dry brush of the base metal color perhaps, and then a highlight of the base metal color up to, you always want to go at least one color brighter than what you've done as the base coat. So if you were doing, say, bolt gun metal as your base silver, you would then wash the bolt gun metal, paint the bolt gun metal again using bolt gun metal, or dry brush using bolt gun metal. And then for the very edges, or however you want to do it, you'd use something like Iron Breaker, or I wouldn't recommend going too bright. Like if you go 2 shades brighter than what you've painted on already, it tends to look a little bit out of place, because it shows up so starkly compared to the undercoat. You can definitely build up to being that bright, but you want to work it up incrementally. So you'd go bolt gun, iron belcher, and then mithril or something similar. But don't go straight from bolt gun to mithril. So yeah, I'm going to call it quits on that video now. There's going to be a full write-up with pictures and a blurb on each stage for painting in this way. But this, I thought, was the best way to get across the bulk of the information you need quickly. Anyway, have a nice day. See you.